Hey guys.
Hi.
We are Brendon and Katie Byrne.
Yes, we are.
And this is part 3 of the series 4 Uncommon Keys to Improving Your Relationships. And the reason why they're uncommon is because it actually has to do with working on yourself to better your relationships. Most often we think, it involves the other person all the time, which isn't the case. So in this part 3, we want to focus on processing through pain. And that may not seem like an obvious tie into relationships, but we want to explain to you how that's so important, and knowing how to process through pain, because everyone experiences it. We all go through life with pain points and uncomfortable things that we have to go through. So, Brendon, do you want to share on how unprocessed pain, or not feeling your pain, can affect your relationships?
Of course. Here's the thing. Even if you're perfect, Jesus was perfect, and he still experienced pain and trauma, right? He still experienced hardship. So we cannot avoid a life where we actually have hardships that we go through, where we have pain that we go through. And so many of us, actually, when we experience pain, we don't allow ourselves to process all the way through it to where we come out whole on the other side.
Yeah.
And this is so important, because if we don't process through our pain, and we'll tell you a little bit more of what that looks like at the end of this, but if we don't process through our pain, we develop a fear of experiencing that pain in the future. And again, this causes us to start living in reaction. And we start living in self-protection. How can I make sure I don't go through that same pain? How can I make sure in our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, to pretty soon we are living in a reaction to the world. We're not able to be our full selves. And this really hurts relationships, because to be in a relationship, you have to be able to risk, you have to be able to be open-hearted, and you have to be able to fully show up. And if you're living in fear and reaction and trying to avoid being hurt, experiencing pain, you're not going to be able to fully do that.
Yeah, and I think this ties in too with part 2 that we were saying of being aware, because if you are trying to avoid feeling pain, you're going to go through life trying to distract yourself, trying to not feel those uncomfortable feelings. And so even that feeds into what we were talking about with part 2 of you're not going to be aware of yourself. And so, and then you won't be able to show up in your relationships that way as well.
So true.
But, so let's see here.
So what's an example of ways that people avoid pain, so you can get a mental picture of this? So say a guy loses his job, gets laid off, and feels maybe he made a mistake, and actually feels kind of the shame of it, feels the hardship, feels
like a failure.
Feels the fear of being able to provide for his family. Now, if he isn't able to process through all those pains, feelings of insecurity, feelings of not enough, that can end up coming out in his relationships and in life all around him, but including his relationships. And what will eventually happen is you'll either have a guy living in reaction to that pain who shows up very passively. They're no longer risking in life. They're trying to avoid any places where they can fail again, any places where they can feel insecure. Or you find a guy who's living in reaction by over showing up, domineering, anger, aggression. And so what happens is, not processing that pain, that man will live in a reaction and not able to be his true self, so either be passive or aggressive on either side.
Yeah, and you can imagine in a marriage the kind of tension and potential conflict that would create between a husband and wife. If he is passive, if he's kind of checked out and distracting himself, he's going to be unavailable to his wife in the ways that he is meant to be available.
Which is difficult in a relationship. That's hard.
Yeah. So another example I want to give you is for myself. There's been seasons in the past where I've gone through some health issues, and it was painful, or not physically even necessarily, but emotionally painful. I've struggled with fear and stress and worry, and if I, luckily I was able to process through that. But if I hadn't, during that time when it was a struggle, there was, it kind of caused issues between us. Like, I couldn't be present with Brendon, and I would be so wrapped up in my mind with fear and worry and what ifs and all the pain that entails. It can be taxing on relationships. So if that wasn't dealt with, that would be kind of a low grade thing that's there all the time in our relationships. So.
Yeah, and even with that, there's There's the genuine Katie that I know and love and I get to experience. And then in those times when she was going through that, it's almost like it was muffled and muted, and I didn't get to fully experience her. And I would miss her. And so it was so important. She took the bull by the horns and was able to go through the hard steps of processing through the pain so she could fully show up.
But there were times where, I wasn't really processing through pain. I just kind of wanted to stay in it. I didn't know what to do. And so definitely during those times it was hard. So what does it look like then to process your pain? Because that may seem confusing, a confusing term. So what does that mean?
Yes, and this is so important because it sounds simple, process your pain. It's an easy thing to say. And yet so few of us we don't really know how to do it. Have you ever noticed that you want to watch Netflix more when you're hurting and when you're stressed? That's us not knowing how to process through pain and avoiding dealing with that issue. We check out in tons of ways. So the first thing you do to process through your pain, it does kind of go back to the previous one, is you have to calm down enough and feel what's actually going on. You have to let yourself feel all those uncomfortable feelings. Feelings like inadequacy, fear, sadness, discouragement, feelings of maybe feeling like you're a failure, whatever it is. But you have to let yourself actually acknowledge what's there so that you can begin to move through it and get God's truth in it.
I mean, another way of putting that is you just have to grieve your pain. And I think a lot of people think that if they let themselves feel those feelings, that it's just never going to end. It's going to be a bottomless pit of pain. But the truth is, once you let yourself really feel the pain and truly grieve it, you do come out the other side almost with a resilience. All right, that's kind of done with, or that season of grieving is done with. Whereas if you don't deal with it, it's just kind of always there in the background. So it's really about grieving your pain, letting yourself feel what you need to feel. A great way to do that too is to journal, or journal with God, or pray to God and just kind of let him know how you're feeling. Or you can write a letter to yourself or the situation, but that's a really good way to feel those feelings.
Yeah. And what's our other way for processing through pain if it involves another person? What do we do then?
Oh, right. So if it involves another person, if it's more in a relational context, once you kind of go through the process of grieving your pain, then that would involve forgiving the other person. And if you're in current relationship with them, probably reconciliation as well. But definitely forgiveness and releasing that pain and releasing that traumatic experience.
Yeah.
So is there any tips you want to give on how they can forgive?
Yeah,
well?
and forgiveness, so often we think of, I forgive you for this. You punched me, I forgive you for punching me. Or I forgive you for calling me this name, whatever it is.
Or yelling at me or whatever, yeah.
But really, true forgiveness isn't about the action, it's about the effects of the action. So if someone was demeaning to you, it's not just I forgive you for those words you said, but I forgive you for the way that you made me feel inferior, the way that you made me feel small. And by voicing those and acknowledging them, you get to release them fully. If you haven't voiced them, if you haven't even let yourself feel what you're forgiving them for, then it's still kind of in there. And so it's not to blame them, it's not to put them down, it's so you can get it out and fully forgive them by owning all the effects of it.
Yeah, and the powerful part in forgiveness is once you do those steps you just mentioned, to invite God into that as well, and to say, God, how do you see this person? What is their true heart? And to be able to have compassion towards them is kind of coming full circle in that forgiveness process. So that's really important too.
Yeah. So I know it sounds simple, process your pain, but I guarantee you this is something that humanity as a whole needs to get better at, because we have a survival instinct inside of us that says when we experience pain, we want to make sure we don't experience it again.
Yeah.
But when it's emotional pain, we can't avoid that. We need to be able to move through it, and life becomes so much better, less reactionary, more present, more risks, more alive. All that will happen if you can start going through the difficult process of feeling the difficult emotions and processing through it with God. So we want to encourage you guys to do that.
Yeah, try it and take note of the ways that it does improve your relationships. Because it will, directly or indirectly in some way. So,
definitely.
Anyways, we will be doing part 4 very soon, so keep an eye out, and we will see you then.
Yeah, see you guys later.